The stars sparkled like diamonds against the black canvas of space as the diplomatic vessel Unity glided through the void. Captain James Walker stood at the bridge, his experienced eyes scanning the sensors. It was supposed to be a routine mission to establish contact with a newly discovered civilization, but something felt off about the silence in this sector. The first sign of trouble came when the ship's sensors detected multiple objects approaching at high speed. Before Walker could even issue orders, dozens of sleek, metallic vessels emerged from what appeared to be nowhere, surrounding the Unity in a perfect formation that spoke of advanced military precision. "All hands to stations," Walker commanded, keeping his voice steady despite the sudden tension filling the bridge. "But maintain non-aggressive posture. We're diplomats first." His crew responded with the efficiency he'd come to expect, though he could see the concern in their eyes. The alien ships were beautiful in a terrifying way, their hulls reflecting the distant starlight like liquid metal. They were clearly more advanced than anything humans had built, but Walker had learned long ago that technology wasn't everything. The communication system crackled to life with a message from the alien fleet. The universal translator took a moment to process before delivering their demands in clear English. "Primitive species, you have expanded beyond your rightful bounds. Surrender your frontier colonies immediately or face extinction. We are the collective, and our word is law in this sector." Walker's jaw tightened, but he maintained his diplomatic composure. "This is Captain James Walker of the Earth Diplomatic Corps. We come in peace and wish to establish diplomatic relations. Surely we can discuss any territorial concerns in a civilized manner." The response came quickly and coldly. "Diplomacy is for equals. You are not our equals." The closest alien vessel fired a warning shot that passed just meters from Unity's bow, its energy wake causing the ship's lights to flicker. "Last chance, Captain," Walker's first officer whispered. "We can still make an emergency jump." Walker shook his head. "If we run now, they'll just attack our colonies without warning. Sometimes you have to stand your ground." He turned to his tactical officer. "Remember those modifications we made to the shield harmonics? The ones Command said were unnecessary for a diplomatic vessel, sir." "Those exactly. Time to show our friends out there why humans don't like war, because we're too damn good at it." What happened next would be studied by both species for years to come. The Unity, despite being a diplomatic vessel, revealed hidden military capabilities that caught the collective completely off guard. Walker had insisted on these modifications based on humanity's long history of peace missions going wrong. When the collective opened fire, expecting an easy kill, the Unity's shields flickered in an unusual pattern, causing their energy weapons to refract back at them. The defensive strategy was something the aliens had never encountered, because it was based on an old human trick of using mirrors to deflect sunlight, adapted for space warfare. The Unity managed to disable 3 alien vessels without destroying them, using precise hits to their propulsion systems. As the human ship danced between enemy fire, the collective commanders experienced their first taste of human ingenuity in combat. "Send them another message," Walker ordered as his ship performed another seemingly impossible maneuver. "Tell them we're still willing to talk, but we won't be bullied." The battle lasted only 20 minutes, but it changed everything. The collective had never encountered a species that could stand against their superior technology, let alone one that could do so with an allegedly diplomatic vessel. When they finally withdrew to regroup, they left with more questions than answers. In his cabin later, Walker recorded his log. "First contact with the collective has gone poorly. They seem to mistake diplomatic restraint for weakness, technological gaps for inferiority. They don't understand that humans don't like war not because we're afraid, but because we're too good at it. We know its cost. I fear they'll learn this lesson the hard way." As the Unity limped back to human space to warn Earth of the new threat, the collective's leaders gathered to discuss this unexpected development. They had expected to find primitive savages. Instead, they had encountered a species that turned their own weapons against them using principles so basic they had never considered them. They didn't know it yet, But this was just the first lesson in why starting a war with humans would be the biggest mistake that the collective had ever made. In the grand meeting hall of the collective's command ship, Blue Shield stood before the Leadership Council, his presentation causing murmurs of concern among the assembled commanders. The tactical analyst had spent the last 3 weeks studying human history, and what he discovered had deeply troubled him. Our initial assessment of humans as primitive was wrong, Blue Shield said, gesturing to the holographic display, showing various human battles throughout history. They have fought more wars among themselves than any species we have encountered. Each conflict taught them new ways to fight, new ways to survive. The council members watched in silence as images of human warfare through the ages played before them. From ancient battles with simple weapons to modern conflicts with advanced technology, the progression was clear. Humans didn't just fight wars, they learned from them. One of the council members, an old commander, leaned forward. "You mean to tell me that their diplomatic vessels' defense systems came from their internal conflicts?" "Yes," Blue Shield replied. "They call it institutional memory. Every human combat strategy builds on thousands of years of warfare. They don't follow a single doctrine of war. They have thousands of them, and they mix and match as needed." The holographic display showed the recent battle with the Unity. Look at how they modified their shields. The principle is so simple that we overlooked it. They took an ancient concept, the mirror, and applied it to modern energy weapons. No other species we've encountered thinks this way. Another council member spoke up. "But surely our technological advantage." Blue Shield interrupted, something that was rarely done in collective meetings. "Our technology didn't help the 3 ships disabled by a diplomatic vessel. Humans have a saying, necessity is the mother of invention. When they need to solve a problem, they become incredibly creative." The presentation shifted to intercepted human communications. "Listen to this." Blue Shield played a recording from a human military channel. "If it bleeds, we can kill it. If it doesn't bleed, we'll find a way to make it bleed." The council chamber grew quiet. The casual confidence in the human's voice was unsettling. "But what truly makes them dangerous is this," Blue Shield continued, showing data from human historical archives. "They hate war. They actively try to avoid it. Not out of fear, but because they're too good at it. They know exactly how horrible it can be, yet when pushed, they fight with a determination that borders on madness." The display showed examples of human battles where vastly outnumbered forces had prevailed through cunning and determination. They have concepts our military doctrine can't account for. Guerrilla warfare, asymmetric conflict, psychological operations. These aren't just military tactics to them. They're art forms. One of the younger commanders scoffed. "Art forms. War is about superior force and technology." Blue Shield shook his head. "That's exactly the kind of thinking that makes humans dangerous to us. While we see war as a science of numbers and technology, they see it as a mixture of science, art, and sheer willpower. They've developed ways to win even when outgunned and outnumbered." The presentation concluded with footage from the Unity's battle. "Notice how they didn't destroy our ships when they could have. That wasn't weakness, it was strategy. They were sending us a message. We can fight if we must, but we'd rather not. It's a level of strategic thinking we hadn't considered." As the council debated these findings, a message arrived from the front lines. 3 more human ships had been encountered. Like the Unity, they had used seemingly primitive concepts in surprisingly effective ways. One had scattered mining debris to create a makeshift asteroid field, turning the very vacuum of space into a weapon. Another had used basic electromagnetic principles to turn the collective's own communication systems against them. The old commander stood up, his expression grave. "We thought we were dealing with primitives who would surrender at the first show of force. Instead, we've awakened a species that has turned warfare into an art form through millennia of practice. And worse, they're pragmatic enough to want to avoid war, yet skilled enough to excel at it." Blue Shield nodded. "That's why they don't like war. Not because they're weak, but because they're too strong. They know exactly what they're capable of, and it scares even them. The council chamber fell silent as this reality sank in. They had started a war with a species that had more combat experience than any race they'd ever encountered. And now, they had to face the consequences of that decision. The collective's attack on 3 human colonies was meant to be a show of force. Their massive warships appeared in perfect formation above each settlement, weapons primed and ready. By all logical calculations, the humans would surrender immediately when faced with such overwhelming power. The collective was wrong. On the first colony, New Haven, the defenders pulled back into the underground mining networks. The collective troops followed, expecting to corner their prey. Instead, they found themselves in a maze of tunnels where their advanced sensors were nearly useless. The humans used their knowledge of the mine layout to appear and disappear at will, striking from unexpected angles and vanishing into hidden passages. "They're everywhere and nowhere," reported a frustrated collective commander. "They're using mining tools as weapons. Who fights with mining tools?" The answer came in the form of a controlled cave-in that trapped an entire collective battalion without killing a single soldier. The humans had turned the very ground into a weapon. The second colony, Pioneer's Rest, seemed almost deserted when the collective landed. They found empty homes and quiet streets, but as their forces spread out to secure the settlement, the colony came alive in the most unexpected ways. Farming equipment had been converted into mobile artillery. Civilian communication networks became tools for electronic warfare. Every household item seemed to have been turned into a trap or a weapon. A group of human defenders led by Lieutenant Tom Reed orchestrated a defense that would be studied for years to come. They used simple mirrors and local dust storms to blind the collective's optical sensors. They reprogrammed cleaning robots to interfere with enemy communications. The colonists fought like they had trained for this their entire lives. "It's not just their soldiers," Blue Shield reported to the council as he watched the battles unfold. "Every human seems to understand warfare at some basic level. They have something they call action movies, entertainment about war. Even their children play games about combat strategy. Their entire culture prepares them for this." The third colony proved to be the biggest surprise. Instead of defending fixed positions, the colonists abandoned their settlements entirely. The collective claimed an easy victory until they realized it was a trap. The humans had moved into the planet's dense forests, using the local wildlife and plant life as cover. They studied how the planet's large predators hunted and adapted those techniques for their own use. "These are farmers and factory workers," a collective field commander reported in disbelief. "How do they know these tactics? How do they adapt so quickly?" The answer came from more of Blue Shield's research. Humans pass down stories of war through generations. They teach their young about famous battles and clever strategies as part of their basic education. What looks like instant adaptation to us is actually them drawing on thousands of years of shared combat knowledge. The battles dragged on for weeks. The collective had superior numbers and technology, but they were fighting an enemy that turned everything into a weapon. Weather patterns, terrain features, local wildlife. The humans used it all. They didn't fight like a military force. They fought like every individual had been personally insulted by the invasion. In one particularly clever move, human defenders used the colony's atmospheric processors to create artificial fog banks, blinding the collective's thermal sensors. In another, they released herds of local cattle into carefully prepared corridors, using the stampeding animals to break enemy formations. After a month of fighting, the collective held 3 mostly empty colonies, but their forces had been badly bloodied. Their troops were exhausted from constantly watching for attacks from any direction. Their morale was shaken by fighting an enemy that seemed to take savage joy in finding new ways to use primitive tools and techniques against advanced technology. "We hold the high ground," a collective general reported. "We control the orbitals. We have superior weapons and armor, but it doesn't feel like we're winning." Blue Shield added this observation to his growing file on human warfare. The humans had a term for this kind of fighting: asymmetric warfare. They didn't try to match the collective's strength. Instead, they turned their own weaknesses into advantages. They made the very act of occupying their colonies so costly and frustrating that victory felt hollow. The collective was learning the hard way why humans didn't like war. It wasn't because they feared it, but because they were masters of it. And they were just getting started. Blue Shield stood in the observation room, watching the recorded footage of human defenders fighting across different colonies. But this time, he wasn't studying their weapons or tactics. He was watching their faces, their body language, the way they moved under pressure. What he saw both fascinated and terrified him. "Look at their eyes," he told the gathered collective commanders, pointing to a close-up image of a human farmer who had turned his harvesting machine into a weapon. "When we corner them, they don't show fear. They show something else." The image zoomed in on the human's face, which displayed an intense focus that seemed almost predatory. The human's hands were shaking, but not from fear. Their heart rate was elevated, but their actions were precise. "They call this the fight or flight response," Blue Shield explained. "But humans have learned to channel the fear response into focused aggression. They actually become more dangerous when we think we have them trapped." One of the commanders shifted uncomfortably. "Is that why we lost an entire squad to a group of human miners? Because they were afraid." "Not just afraid," Blue Shield corrected. "Humans have a concept they call backs against the wall. When they have no escape, instead of surrendering, they become more determined, more creative, more lethal." He showed footage of the mining incident where cornered humans had used industrial cutting tools to devastating effect against collective armor. The presentation continued with more examples. A human settlement, cut off from supplies and surrounded, had held out for weeks longer than any logical calculation suggested possible. The defenders had eaten local plants that were barely edible, recycled water from nearly any source, and turned everyday items into weapons. "They call it nothing left to lose," Blue Shield explained. "It's a psychological state we didn't know was possible. When humans believe everything is already lost, they fight with complete disregard for their own survival. But not in a chaotic way. They become coldly efficient." The room grew quiet as they watched footage of human defenders fighting house to house in one of the colonies. The humans were clearly exhausted, hungry, and outgunned. But they fought with an intensity that made several collective commanders look away from the screens. "Our soldiers are starting to fear them," one commander admitted. "Not because of their weapons, but because of their unpredictability. We never know if we're fighting desperate civilians or highly trained warriors. They all fight with the same intensity." Blue Shield nodded and brought up new data. "Humans have something they call adrenaline. When they're under threat, their bodies produce chemicals that make them stronger, faster, and nearly immune to pain. We've seen mothers lift crashed vehicles to save their children. Injured soldiers continuing to fight with wounds that should have stopped them." The analysis shifted to psychological profiles of captured human defenders. Many showed signs of what humans called combat stress, but instead of breaking down, they had adapted. They slept in short bursts, ate whatever they could find, and maintained their will to fight under conditions that should have broken them. "Their minds are as adaptable as their tactics," Blue Shield continued. "They have a saying, 'What doesn't kill you makes you stronger.' They actually learn from their suffering and use it to become more effective fighters." A younger commander raised a concerning point. "Our troops are reporting nightmares. They say the humans don't just fight. They study us while they fight. They learn our patterns, our weaknesses. Even when we win, it feels like they're gathering information for the next battle." Blue Shield's final observation was perhaps the most troubling. Humans have a concept called righteous anger when they believe they're fighting for their homes, their families, or what they call justice. They become nearly unstoppable. Not because of physical strength, but because they simply refuse to accept defeat. As the presentation ended, the command room was unusually quiet. The collective had started this war believing they were dealing with primitives who would break under pressure. Instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy who turned fear into strength, desperation into determination, and impossible situations into opportunities. "We're not just fighting their weapons or tactics," Blue Shield concluded. "We're fighting their will. And their will, shaped by thousands of years of warfare, might be the strongest weapon they have." The human research facility was bustling with activity as Commander Ann Miller walked through its corridors. Around her, teams of scientists and engineers worked on captured collective technology. What amazed the alien observers watching through hidden sensors wasn't just what the humans were doing, it was how fast they were doing it. A captured collective shield generator lay partially disassembled on a workbench. Next to it sat what looked like a farming tractor's power core, crudely but effectively modified to power the alien device. The humans hadn't just figured out how to use collective technology. They were finding ways to power it with their own primitive equipment. "It's not pretty, but it works," one of the engineers told Miller, pointing to the hybrid device. "Their tech is more advanced, but the basic principles are the same. Energy is energy, whether it comes from their fancy power cells or our tractor batteries." In another section of the facility, technicians had taken the coating from collective armor and found a way to apply it to regular human spacesuits. They discovered that the alien material could be melted down and reforged using simple heat treatment methods that humans had known for centuries. Miller picked up one of the modified helmets and smiled. They thought their technology was too advanced for us to understand. They didn't realize that humans have been taking things apart and putting them back together in new ways since we first picked up stone tools. The collective's observation team watched with growing concern as the humans demonstrated an uncanny ability to adapt alien technology. They didn't try to fully understand how everything worked. They just figured out enough to make it useful. A group of human mechanics had taken the propulsion system from a damaged collective scout ship and were working to install it on a human mining vessel. They hadn't deciphered all the complex theories behind the alien drive, but they understood enough about thrust and power distribution to make it work. "This is impossible," one of the collective observers reported back to command. "They're mixing their primitive technology with our advanced systems in ways that shouldn't work, but somehow they're making it work." The turning point came during a battle near one of the outer colonies. A human strike team led by Commander Miller appeared in ships that looked like they had been built from spare parts, because they had been. The vessels were ugly combinations of human and collective technology, but they were devastatingly effective. Miller's team had taken the collective's own shielding technology and modified it based on the same principles the Unity had used in the first battle. But this time, they didn't just reflect energy weapons. They absorbed the energy and used it to power their own systems. "Remember what they said about us being primitive," Miller radioed to her team as they engaged the collective ships. "Let's show them what primitives can do with a little innovation." The battle that followed was unlike anything the collective had ever seen. The human ships moved in ways that defied their tactical predictions, using modified collective technology in ways its creators had never imagined. They didn't fight with the elegant precision of the collective. They fought with a brutal creativity that turned every piece of technology into a potential weapon. Back in the research facility, the breakthroughs continued. Human scientists found ways to interface their simple computer systems with collective technology. They didn't try to match the aliens' advanced computing power. Instead, they found shortcuts and workarounds that achieved similar results with far less sophisticated equipment. "They're not just copying our technology," Blue Shield reported to an increasingly worried collective command. "They're improving it. They're finding ways to do things with our equipment that we never considered. They're not bound by our preconceptions about how our own technology should work." The implications were clear. Every piece of technology the collective used against humans would eventually be turned against them, not as a simple copy, but as something new and unpredictable. The humans were like students who not only learned from their teachers, but found ways to surpass them by thinking differently. As Miller's team returned from another successful mission, she logged a simple message. The collective thought their advanced technology made them superior. They didn't understand that humans don't just use tools. We reimagine them. We adapt them. We make them our own. And in this war, that might be our greatest strength. The Grand Council chamber of the Collective's flagship was filled with tension as reports from the front lines streamed in. Another fleet had been forced to retreat from human space, not because they were defeated in direct combat, but because they could no longer predict what they were fighting against. "Our soldiers are afraid," announced one of the fleet commanders, his voice heavy with concern. "Not of dying, but of the uncertainty. Every time we think we understand human tactics, they change them. Every time we deploy new technology, they find a way to turn it against us." Blue Shield stood quietly in the corner, watching the growing discord among the Collective's leadership. His warnings from the beginning of the war now seemed prophetic. The humans weren't just fighting back. They were getting better at it with each passing day. 3 more ships refused to engage human forces yesterday, reported another commander. The crews simply declined to fight. They say it's like fighting against a force of nature that learns and adapts. Our soldiers are trained to follow patterns, to obey rules. The humans break every rule we know. The council room's displays showed footage from recent battles. A human ship, badly damaged and seemingly defeated, had played dead until a collective vessel came close to confirm the kill. Then it had exploded outward, not with weapons, but with a cloud of mining debris that shredded the collective ship's sensors and weapons. "They're not just fighting with weapons anymore," Blue Shield finally spoke up. "They're fighting with ideas. Each defeat teaches them. Each victory makes them more dangerous. Our greatest advantage, our technological superiority, is becoming meaningless." A younger council member stood up angrily. "We cannot show weakness. We are the Collective. We have dominated this sector for thousands of years. These humans are barely out of their Stone Age." An old commander laughed bitterly at this. "That's exactly why we're losing. Look at their history. They went from first flight to landing on their moon in just 66 years. From basic atoms to nuclear power in less than 50 years. They advance faster because they're young, hungry, and most importantly, they're not afraid to try new things." The displays shifted to show the growing list of collective casualties, not just ships and equipment, but the psychological toll on their forces. Soldiers were requesting transfers away from the front lines. Some of the best tactical minds in the Collective were asking to be relieved of command, claiming they could no longer predict or counter human strategies. "They don't fight like a proper military force," complained one commander. "They fight like every human is making up their own way to wage war. There's no pattern to predict, no standard doctrine to counter." Blue Shield nodded and stepped forward. "That's because humans don't see war as just a military exercise. To them, it's a full expression of their creativity, their determination, and their will to survive. Every human becomes a weapon. Every tool becomes military technology. Every civilian becomes a potential soldier." The council chamber fell silent as footage played from a recent battle. A group of human miners had modified their drilling equipment into makeshift weapons. They didn't just fight back. They innovated in the middle of combat, adapting their tactics as they learned what worked against collective armor. "We're not just fighting their military," Blue Shield continued. "We're fighting their entire species' survival instinct, and they're proving to be better at survival than any species we've encountered." The oldest member of the council, who had been quiet until now, slowly stood up. "I have fought in wars for 300 cycles. I have never seen anything like this. The humans, they don't break. They bend, they adapt, they seemingly lose, and then they come back stronger. It's like fighting against evolution itself." More reports flooded in. Another colony lost to human guerrilla tactics. Another fleet reporting unusual equipment failures after engaging human forces. Another batch of soldiers requesting psychiatric evaluation after encountering human psychological warfare techniques. "This war was a mistake," the old council member concluded. "We thought we were teaching them a lesson about their place in the galaxy. Instead, they're teaching us why their kind of adaptability and determination is more valuable than all our technology and tradition. The council chamber grew quiet again as the reality sank in. They had started this war thinking they were the teachers. Now they were learning why humans had tried to avoid war in the first place, not out of weakness, but out of a deep understanding of just how good they were at it. The small meeting room on a neutral space station hung suspended between human and collective space. Captain James Walker sat at one end of the table, while Blue Shield sat at the other. Both sides had agreed to this secret meeting, knowing their species couldn't afford to continue this war. "Your first shot wasn't meant to destroy my ship," Walker said, breaking the silence. "You aimed to miss. You wanted to scare us into submission." It wasn't a question, but a statement of understanding. Blue Shield's expression changed in a way that humans had learned to read as agreement. "And your countermeasures weren't designed to kill our crews. You disabled our ships when you could have destroyed them." The room's air recyclers hummed quietly as both representatives considered what those initial choices meant. Even in their first hostile encounter, both sides had tried to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. "We thought your reluctance to fight meant you were weak," Blue Shield continued. "We didn't understand that it came from strength. The strength to know what war truly costs." He placed a data device on the table, showing statistics from the conflict. Both sides had suffered, but the pattern was clear. The longer the war continued, the more effective humans became at fighting it. Walker nodded slowly. "We don't like war because we're too good at it. Every conflict teaches us more. Every battle makes us more dangerous. We try to avoid war because we know that once we start fighting, we won't stop until we've mastered it. And that mastery comes at a terrible price." Blue Shield shared footage from various battles, but this time focusing on the aftermath. Humans treating wounded collective soldiers, collective ships holding fire to allow human civilian vessels to evacuate. Even in war, both sides had shown glimpses of mercy. "Your people adapt faster than any species we encountered," Blue Shield observed. "But it's not just your technology or tactics. You adapt psychologically, emotionally. You learn not just how to fight, but why to fight, and why not to." Walker gestured to the stars visible through the station's window. "Out there, we're all just trying to survive. Humans learned long ago that the greatest victory isn't defeating your enemy. It's turning them into a friend." The conversation shifted to shared discoveries. Humans had learned much from collective technology, not just for warfare, but for peaceful applications. The collective had learned from human adaptability and creativity. Both sides had grown stronger, but not in the ways either had expected. "Your people have a saying," Blue Shield said. "The best sword stays in its sheath." We didn't understand it before. War isn't just about the ability to fight. It's about the wisdom to know when not to. Walker smiled slightly. "And your people have technologies we could only dream of. Imagine what we could accomplish together instead of fighting each other." They spent hours talking, not as enemies, but as representatives of cultures that had misunderstood each other. The collective's rigid hierarchy had seen human flexibility as chaos. Humans had seen the collective's order as stagnation. Both had been wrong. "We offer peace," Blue Shield finally said, "not because we're afraid of losing, but because we've learned why you tried to avoid this war in the first place. Victory means nothing if it costs us our wisdom." "And we accept," Walker replied, "not because we're tired of fighting, but because peace gives us a chance to grow in ways that war never could." They drafted a simple agreement. The collective would recognize human independence and their right to colonize. Humans would share their adaptability and help the collective grow beyond their rigid traditions. Both would learn from each other. As they prepared to return to their respective ships, Blue Shield had one last question. "If you're so skilled at warfare, why did your people focus so much on diplomacy?" Walker paused at the door. "Because the greatest battle is the one you win without fighting. We learned that the hard way through centuries of war among ourselves. Now we try to teach others what we learned, so they don't have to pay the same price we did." As their ships departed the neutral station, Both sides understood something fundamental had changed. The collective had sought to teach humans their place in the galaxy. Instead, humans had taught them why peace was the true measure of civilization's strength. In his final report to the Council, Blue Shield wrote, "We began this conflict believing we were superior because we had mastered technology. We ended it understanding that the humans were stronger because they had mastered themselves. They don't like war not because they fear it, but because they respect its power. And that respect makes them the most dangerous and most wise adversaries we have ever faced."